Tampa, Florida, 2025. On the darkened ice of Amalie Arena, Phil Esposito, 83 years old, walks slowly across the rink where he once became a legend. He was once an unstoppable storm in the world of hockey, the first player in NHL history to surpass 100 points in the 1968-69 season, the man who scored 76 goals in the 1970-71 season, a record that left America stunned. Alongside Bobby Orr, he led the Boston Bruins to 2 Stanley Cups in 1970 and 1972, turning the city into a capital of pride. 5 Art Ross trophies, 2 Hart Memorial trophies, and an immortal place in the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1984. His number 7 jersey hangs forever under the rafters of Boston Garden, and a bronze statue outside Amalie Arena in Tampa stands as a reminder that he was the one who brought hockey to a land without snow, igniting passion in millions of Americans. At his peak, Phil Esposito was the embodiment of strength, courage, and unyielding ambition, a man who made the world stop to watch. But beneath that glory lies another story, quiet, tear-stained, and full of shadows. The cost of fame was years of loneliness, a broken marriage when he chose work over family, and the unspoken pain of losing his daughter Carrie to an aneurysm and his brother Tony to cancer. The heart that once overcame every challenge now beats slowly, but its will has never faded. Despite back pain and trembling hands, he still goes to the studio, still talks about hockey with a hoarse, warm voice. He can't return to his golden days, but he keeps walking slowly, resiliently, as if each glide on the ice is a prayer for those he's lost and for the faith that never died within him. Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, a small town blanketed by snow, smoke, and the roar of the steel mill. In that place, winter skies were always gray, and cold seeped through every crack in wooden doors. Phil Esposito was born in those years in a humble Italian immigrant family where hard work was the measure of a person's worth. The clang of steel on steel, the whistle of shift changes, the hiss of steam from towering smokestacks, it all formed the soundtrack of his childhood. In their small, damp house, his father, Patrick, was a quiet, disciplined, tough man. He believed everything worth having came at the cost of sweat and blood. His mother, Frances, was gentler but reserved, her worries hidden in her eyes. They didn't know how to say, "You did great." To them, good enough was praise enough. At the mill, Phil's father spent his life with red-hot steel. At home, he taught his son the only truth he knew. No one will feel sorry for you. You have to be tougher than everything. But young Phil wasn't like the men around him while they knew only shifts, cold beer, and exhaustion. Phil dreamed of rink lights, cheering crowds, and the moment the ice cracked under his stick. Yet, from the start, that dream was mocked. Phil was chubby, broad-shouldered, slow-footed. At his first youth team tryout, the coach glanced at him and shook his head. "That kid's too heavy, not fast enough. He won't go anywhere in hockey." Those words haunted him for years. At school, kids called him Fat Phil. On the backyard rink, they laughed as he fell, stick broken, face smeared with snow. He learned to swallow tears, grit his teeth, and get up. One thought burned in his mind. Asterisk. One day, they'll have to see me. Asterisk. At 15, while other kids slept in warm blankets, Phil joined his father for morning shifts at the Algoma steel mill. The grind of machines, the smell of oil, the scorching heat, and the dust of iron coating his face. The teenager wiped sweat, his shirt soaked, hands blistered. His father never praised, only said, "That's life. You have to do better." At the mill, Phil learned 2 things. No one saves you, and pain never kills your will. It only forges you stronger. Each workday fueled his longing to escape that place. The smell of molten steel, the crackling roar of the furnaces suffocated him. After shifts, he'd rush to the rink, where the world grew quieter, where he could hear the glide of his skates, his own breath, instead of machinery. "When I skated," he once said, "I didn't hear my father yelling, didn't hear the steel, only my heart." That was freedom, the only moment he didn't feel small. Phil's first stick was crafted by his father from scrap wood in the shop. His skates were hand-me-downs, stitched with wire. But on the ice, he turned every lack into energy. He practiced alone each morning, slamming his stick against the ice until his wrists burned. Each shot was a blow against every taunt, every dismissive glance. In Sault Ste. Marie, people didn't dream of being athletes. They dreamed of wages to survive winter, a house warm enough for kids to sleep. But Phil was different. He wanted more to be remembered, to see the name Esposito lit up on a scoreboard, to have his father, just once, say he was proud. One night, snow fell thicker than ever. Wind whipped through fences, frost blanketed the town. Phil dragged his stick to the rink alone, no one else there. He skated in the freezing wind, breath vanishing like smoke, face flushed, sweat dripping from his brow. Each lap was a test of himself, each fall a lesson in not giving up. As dawn lingered, he stopped in the rink's center, took a deep breath, and slammed his stick against the ice, the sound echoing in the empty space like a vow. Asterisk. They won't dare ignore me again. Asterisk. That moment, unseen by anyone, without spectators or glory, just a teenager swearing to the darkness that he wouldn't be forgotten. From that night, Phil Esposito began to change. He arrived at the rink earlier, left later, shot pucks until his fingers bled. He ran through snow, fueled by the shame of being mocked. Outside, Sault Ste. Marie remained cold, poor, and roaring with steel. But in his heart, a fire had ignited. It wasn't loud or dazzling, just a steady, stubborn burn that refused to go out. Years later, as a legend, he still recalled that town where dreams froze, where he learned to endure, to reject pity, and to rise after every fall. Because it was there, amid black smoke and white ice, that the chubby, mocked kid was forged into a man of steel, a soul that knew only pain could make you stronger. In the early 1960 seconds, the boy from Sault Ste. Marie stepped into the big world of the NHL, where lights blazed and dreams became real, but where harsh realities also began. Phil Esposito signed with the Chicago Blackhawks, carrying naive faith and the grit forged in the steel mill. But in that team, no one waited for a chubby, slow kid with an Ontario accent. He sat on the bench, tied laces for others, wiped sweat in the locker room, while the ice belonged to names people remembered. Some nights, he stayed late after practice, staring at the empty rink, wondering if he was meant for this. Each time he hit the ice, he fought not just opponents but prejudice. He's not fast enough, lacks finesse. What they didn't see was his will. Every rare goal in a Chicago jersey was a stab back at the critics, a first crack in the ice of doubt surrounding him. Then fate struck like a storm in 1967. He was traded to the Boston Bruins, and that seemingly minor move changed his life. "My life turned black and gold that day," he once said. Boston, with its victory, hungry stands and working-class roar like his own, became the place he belonged. And there, Phil Esposito began to blaze. In just his first 2 seasons, he broke 100 points unheard of in NHL history. In 1970-71, he scored 76 goals and 152 points, a record that stunned America. The press called him the fire on ice. Boston Garden lit up every night, fans chanting, "Phil, Phil, Phil," like a collective oath. He stood at the eye of the glory storm, stick swinging like a thunderbolt, each goal a spark through the frozen surface. When he scored his 50th goal, he looked up at thousands of cheering faces, and for a fleeting moment, the boy once called too fat to play had answered every jeer. But glory, like ice under lights, melts fast. The higher he climbed, the colder it felt. On nights when Boston Garden erupted, fans screaming, he left the ice and returned home to silence. People cheered the record-breaker Esposito, but he saw only a tired man in the mirror, eyes hollow. "Each goal lasts a few seconds," he said, "but the night goes on forever." Behind the admiration was loneliness. Behind the light, darkness. The pressure to score became a chain. Every game, he had to prove yesterday's glory wasn't a fluke. His body ached, but he played on. Wrists taped, shoulders sore, eyes shadowed, yet when the whistle blew, he charged, as if stopping would collapse his entire legacy. Boston loved him, but demanded he never show weakness. The press called him a ruthless perfectionist, harsher on himself than anyone. He played as if battling his fear of being forgotten. 1970, a fateful year. Phil and Bobby Orr led the Bruins to their second Stanley Cup. The image of him hoisting the cup amid a sea of black and gold became an era's icon. That night, Boston didn't sleep. Thousands flooded the streets, flares lighting the sky. But when the celebration ended, Phil sat alone in the locker room. Sweat and champagne mingled into a bitter taste. Dim lights reflected his weary, empty face. "Would Dad be proud?" he whispered, a question no one answered. The man who'd lifted a city to its peak felt like the boy in the steel mill again, still craving his father's nod. The silver cup was cold, the lights blinding. "We are the champions," echoed far. But in his heart, only silence remained. As the team hit the bars to celebrate, he left early, walking through Boston's snow, the wind as biting as his salt-sweet Marie home. In that moment, he realized no number of goals or titles could fill the void in his heart, a void the cheers couldn't touch. And from that moment, Phil understood that glory always demands a price: peace. They hailed him as the man of the year, a living legend, but he knew, deep down, he was still that boy once mocked as fat, head bowed on a dark rink, only now with a thicker, colder layer of ice around his heart. In 1975, while his name still echoed in record books, Boston abruptly traded Phil Esposito like a discarded commodity. The trade to the New York Rangers hit without warning, a fall harder than any hit on the ice. Boston, where he'd poured his heart and youth, where he'd made the city tremble with pride, turned its back. Their hero was now seen through the cold lens of betrayal. Fans burned his number 7 jersey, tore his pictures from magazines. At Kenmore bars, some spat, he left for money. But no one knew he sat alone in an empty apartment, staring at the snowy sky, asking, "Why am I no longer loved?" Arriving in New York, he was no longer Boston's fire. At Madison Square Garden, they saw him as an old monument displayed in the wrong place. "Stranger," the media called him. The Rangers' locker room, where he hoped for a fresh start, became a place of conflict. Younger teammates saw him as a heavy legacy, not a leader. He forced a smile, but after practice, back pain doubled him over, hands numb from old falls. "They clap when I fail," he said, "because only then do they feel stronger than me." The more he tried to prove himself, the more distant he felt. On game nights, he still scored, but the spotlight no longer warmed his hardened heart. New York's press was crueler than ice. They called him the fallen giant, the drifting legend. Each article was a knife to the pride of a man who once made the NHL tremble. In the winter of 1977, his back pain grew severe. Doctors said, "Rest." But Phil didn't know what rest meant. He played on, injecting painkillers before games, skating as if fleeing himself. The injury wasn't just in his back, it was deeper, in his soul. In New York, he had no friends. In Boston, old drinking buddies avoided him. His first marriage began to crack. He and his wife drifted apart like ships on opposite courses. She once said, "You love hockey more than anything." He stayed silent, because deep down, he knew it was true. At home, he sat for hours before the TV, drink in hand, eyes vacant. He drank not to forget, but to drown the silence around him. Some nights, he dreamed of Boston's crowds chanting his name, only to wake in darkness, heart racing, pillow soaked with sweat. In 1981, he hung up his skates. No orchestra, no farewell party. Just the sound of his skates on the ice one last time and a few scattered claps. As he left the rink, the sound faded like melting ice in the night. Slow, cold, unnoticed. His whole life, he'd lived for the crowd's roar. And now, silence was the scariest thing. He thought retirement would bring peace, but the void grew larger. Months later, he returned to the Rangers, not with a stick but in a suit, as coach and general manager. A powerful role, but soulless. The team kept losing, and New York's press mocked again. Esposito, once ablaze, now just ashes. He stood behind the bench, watching young players live the life he once had. Each goal they scored was a bell tolling his dead past. He stifled sighs, his smile a crooked mask. At times, he wondered, am I repeating the same mistake living for others' glory? Those years, loneliness wasn't just a feeling, it was reality. He arrived at the rink earliest, left latest, walking past empty stands. His interviews dwindled, his eyes lost their spark. Once a symbol of strength, he was now a relic of a bygone era. Lost legend, the New York Post headlined, like a verdict. But deep down, Phil wasn't angry. He was just tired. Tired of proving he still existed. Tired of having nowhere to return. When the final season ended, he left the Rangers' office at night, carrying nothing but a small keepsake trophy. Outside, snow fell thick, like in Sault Ste. Marie years ago. He paused in the street, looked at the gray sky, and remembered the steel hammers of his youth. All his life, he'd fled that noise only to find, in the end, just silence. Once again, Phil Esposito became the gatekeeper of others' worlds, only this time, the gate had closed forever. After all the failures, the lonely winters, and the years that passed in silence, Phil Esposito could have rested. He had done enough, had his name in the Hall of Fame, had a statue, had everything an athlete could dream of. But in that man's heart, the fire still burned. Like steel, only when pushed to its limits do you know how much it can endure. In 1990, he returned to the hockey world with a crazy idea, bringing the NHL to Florida, a place with no ice, no snow, and no one who believed the sport could survive. When Phil pitched the project to the NHL board, the room erupted in laughter. One member blurted, "You gonna skate on sand?" But he didn't back down. "If we only play hockey where there's snow," he said, "it'll stay a game of the past. I want it to belong to the future." He had no money, no backing, only faith, and an old reputation the press had long stopped mentioning. He sold his house, mortgaged his assets, borrowed from friends, scraped together every penny to file for a team. They called him the old dreamer in the desert. A reporter sneered, "Esposito's trying to fight time, but the ice will melt before he wins." He just smiled, but inside a storm raged. His press conferences were flooded with camera flashes. On the podium, he still smiled, still waved his hands talking about the future, but beneath the suit jacket were dark circles under his eyes, a gaunt face from sleepless nights. He ate instant noodles, lived frugally, knocked on every Tampa business for sponsorship. Many refused. Some were blunt. "Florida doesn't need hockey, Mr. Esposito." But Phil didn't quit. "I've heard that my whole life," he said, "that I wasn't enough, couldn't do it, shouldn't try. I'm still here." In 1992, the dream came true. The Tampa Bay Lightning was born. On the day the team took the ice for the first time, the stands were packed with over 11,000 people, most of whom had never watched hockey, cheering with curiosity and excitement. As the national anthem played, Phil stood by the tunnel, eyes welling up. He'd thought he'd cry from joy, but the tears fell from emptiness. No family sat beside him. His old marriage had crumbled during the months he chased the project. Friends drifted away, unable to grasp why a man who had it all would start from zero. "It cost me everything, a marriage, money, but not my soul," he said in an interview. That was the raw truth. He'd lost everything except his soul. But that soul built the Lightning, a team of sunshine, of faith, of those who never surrender. The early years were brutal. The young team lost relentlessly. Radio hosts mocked. Phil Esposito brought hockey to Florida to teach people how to fail. He still sat in the stands every game, face rigid, hands gripping the seat. When the team lost, he bowed his head to apologize to players, to fans. No one knew he stayed up all night, reading every scathing article, listening to talk shows calling him the fool who brought ice to the land of Sunday. Once, leaving the arena after a loss, he overheard two strangers say, "He's trying to buy back his fame with delusions." He kept walking, didn't look back. But those words followed him for years, heavier than any wound. To keep the team alive, Phil did everything, calling sponsors, paying staff salaries himself. Some nights, he drove alone through Tampa's empty streets, staring at the glowing Lightning sign and wondering if he was wrong. But every time he saw kids lining up for autographs, their eyes sparkling at the sight of sticks and jerseys, he knew he wasn't. He'd once been deemed not good enough, not fast enough, not worthy. Now, he gave that belief to others, to kids without chances, to a city that never loved the sport. "If I can make the impossible real one more time," he said, "this life is still worth living." The Tampa Bay Lightning grew from that man's hands. Each small victory, each fuller stand, each kid donning his number 7 jersey. But the cost was staggering. He was financially drained, his health failing, sleep fitful, back pain constant. Those who once mocked him fell silent, and he, watching his team skate under the lights, only sighed. "I brought hockey to a place it didn't belong," he said, "and realized I left my heart on the ice." A simple statement, but it held everything: pride, loss, and the truth that passion, unchecked, can burn a life to ashes. In that Tampa night of 1992, amid cheers and victory music, Phil Esposito stood alone by the tunnel, watching the light reflect off the ice. He smiled, but in his eyes, something broke. A new glory was born, but his heart, after years of burning bright, had begun to cool. After the storm of the 1,990 seconds, when the Tampa Bay Lightning stood firm on its own, the man with a soul of steel thought he'd finally found peace. In his later years, Phil Esposito had a warm home in Tampa, a gentle new wife named Bridget, and a job as a broadcaster to keep him close to the game he'd lived and died for. This marriage was calmer, quieter, as if both knew they'd endured too much loss to argue. Bridget cared for him with the patience of someone who understood that, sometimes, the past is a wound that never heals. They watched old Bruins, Rangers, and Lightning tapes together, and when Phil smiled, it was brief, as if fearing happiness had limits. But then fate knocked again, cruel as ever. Phil's daughter, Carrie, his gentle light and only pride, died suddenly in 2012 from an abdominal aneurysm. No warning, no goodbye. Just a phone call in the scorching Tampa noon, and his world collapsed. At the funeral, hundreds from the hockey world came to pay respects, but he saw no one. The room blurred, leaving only Carrie's photo on the table, her brown hair falling gently, smiling at her father. Phil sat motionless, trembling hands on the frame, whispering, "I won every battle, except this one." Tears fell onto wrinkled fingers, soaking into the photo and vanishing like every beautiful thing that had slipped from his life. That night, the Tampa house was freezing. Bridget said he sat on the porch until dawn, silent, staring at the sky, murmuring his daughter's name like a prayer lost in the wind. Months later, a young man knocked Dylan, 19, Carrie's son. His eyes were his mother's, his smile identical. When he stepped inside, Phil felt time stop. "The kid smiles just like his mom," he said softly, then opened his arms to hug Dylan. No words needed. From then on, the house filled with voices, laughter, and long silences, as he taught his grandson to skate, to hold a stick, then fell quiet, realizing these were the lessons he'd once given Carrie years ago. Bridget watched them on the backyard rink, knowing that in those moments, Phil both found a piece of his lost heart and feared it might break again. But life never stopped testing him. In 2021, more bad news. Tony Esposito, his brother, the legendary goaltender, his lifelong companion, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Phil went to the Chicago hospital, held Tony's hand, and they sat in silence for a long time. All their lives, they'd talked hockey, victories, nights ablaze in Boston Garden, but then neither could speak. Tony smiled weakly. "You were always the scorer. I just tried to keep the net." Phil gripped his hand, voice breaking. "Without you, I'd never have gotten there." When Tony took his final breath, Phil turned away, hiding his tears. He said later, "For the first time, I had no one to call after a game." Losing his brother, his daughter, most of those who understood him, it left Phil's sky forever gray. His health faded. High blood pressure, constant back pain, hands that once lifted, cups now trembling as he signed autographs. But every morning, he went to the Lightning's radio station, voice hoarse but warm, recounting games, mentioning Tony with unhidden respect and pain. When he was alive, he said, "I talk too much." He joked lightly on air. "Now I'm talking for both of us." Listeners laughed, but his voice held a small, lingering pause, like a stifled sob. Evenings, when Bridget slept, he sat alone in the living room, a single yellow lamp on. On the table, a frame with 3 faces: him, Carrie, and Tony. The light reflected on the glass, making them seem still there, smiling, alive, filling the room with memories. He'd whisper, "I still hear them. Sometimes." Tony grumbling, "I got a player's name wrong." Carrie giggling, "I know I'm getting old, but if that's how I stay close to them, I'm not afraid." That Tampa house, in a sunlit city, sometimes felt as cold as Sault Ste. Marie long ago. On the wall hung his number 7 jersey, beneath a photo of the Lightning hoisting the cup. But what gave the house soul wasn't the trophies, it was the lost figures lingering in every corner. When Dylan slept, Phil stood by his door, watching the faint light spill out, and smiled. "Don't fear failure, son," he'd said. "It's not as scary as not daring to love what you believe in." Then he'd softly turn off the lamp, walk to the photo on the table. In the dim light, 3 faces reflected on the glass, smiling back at him. The lamp's glow mingled with the heavy breath of night, like the slow beat of a heart once wounded, but never stopped. Many years after the losses, time flowed like an underground stream, slow and silent. Phil Esposito still lived in a small house in Tampa, not far from Amalie Arena, where the team he founded had become the city's pride. He still went there, sometimes just to sit alone in the empty stands, listening to the hum of the cooling system, like the lingering heartbeat of his life. When the Tampa Bay Lightning won their first Stanley Cup in 2004, he sat in the broadcast booth, headphones on, eyes blurred with tears. He didn't cry for the victory, but for the strange feeling swelling in his chest that, at last, every sacrifice, every moment of loneliness, collapse, and loss had not been in vain. 16 years later, the team won again, and once more in 2021, amid a pandemic and separation. That time, he lacked the strength to celebrate at the arena. He sat before a screen, hands trembling, voice choking as cheers echoed from the rink. "Lightning win the cup!" His eyes welled up. "We did it, Tony! Carrie! We finally did it!" A year later, the city unveiled a bronze statue of him outside Amalie Arena. On the dedication day, he arrived late, not because of illness, but because he didn't want to be the center of attention. When the crowd dispersed, he quietly approached the statue. There he stood, stick in hand, gaze resolute in the sunlit plaza. Phil touched the cold bronze, whispering, "Tony, Carrie, we did it." Then he bowed his head for a long time. Passersby thought he was praying, but it was an apology for the years he lost too much to chase a dream. Now at 83, Phil's mornings no longer began with crowd roars or referee whistles, but with physical therapy. He moved slowly, back stiff, knees aching, eyes dimmed by the lights that once burned him. When the doctor asked why he didn't rest, he only smiled. "If I stop moving, I'll turn to stone, and stone's colder than ice." After each session, he sat signing posters sent by fans. His handwriting was shaky, but every signature was real. He said, "People gave me their love. The least I can do is give them a few words." In his final years, Phil spoke less about records. He spoke about children. He started raising funds to help kids without opportunities, creating free hockey programs for poor youth in Tampa. "The only thing I can leave behind is opportunity," he said. Watching kids practice on the ice, laughing under the lights, he saw his younger self, the chubby boy mocked, the boy who stood alone in Salt Sweet, Marie's winter. Now, they didn't have to fight alone. One windless Florida night, he sat at his desk, a dim lamp illuminating stacks of paper. On the table was a cold cup of tea and a photo of Dylan. Phil was writing his will. He wrote carefully. The house would go to Bridget, but most of his assets, nearly all, would fund community programs and scholarships for kids. In slanted handwriting, he added, "Dylan doesn't need money. He needs grit, not inheritance." He looked up at Carrie's photo on the wall, smiling. "Your boy will be fine, kid." Old age came to Phil quietly. He spoke less, went out less, no longer appeared often on TV. Lightning fans still saw him at ceremonies, in the front row, face kind and eyes glistening. They called him the soul of the team. But he knew that soul was forged from wounds. Sometimes, on sleepless nights, he sat on the porch, listening to crickets and the breeze through palm trees. Florida was still warm, but his heart held only the chill of memory. He recalled Boston Garden ablaze, Tony in the net, Carrie's laugh over the phone asking, "Did the team win today?" All were now just echoes, but instead of sorrow, he felt peace. Some losses you never overcome, you just learn to live with them. Bridget said one morning she found him sitting before a mirror for a long time. When she asked, he only smiled. "I'm learning to forgive myself." And for the first time in over 80 years, Phil Esposito wasn't fighting anyone, not prejudice, not pressure, not time. He just sat there, old, trembling, but at peace. After a lifetime of storms, he understood. Glory isn't victory, but daring to love yourself again after defeat. Florida nights stretched long, moonlight spilling onto the wooden table where his unfinished will lay. His signature slanted but firm. Outside, the distant sound of ice from the nearby arena echoed, faint, dreamlike, a greeting from a world he once belonged to. Phil closed his eyes, breathed slowly, and whispered, "For the first time in 80 years, I stopped fighting and learned to forgive myself." That spring, Boston held a tribute for the Bruins' golden era, those who brought the first Stanley Cups after decades of waiting. The Garden's stands blazed, thousands rising as Phil Esposito emerged from the tunnel. He wore a dark suit, back slightly hunched, steps slow as if each carried a heavy memory. The spotlight caught his silver hair, making him look like an ember left from a once raging storm. The crowd clapped, chanted his name, but Phil only smiled, eyes wet. The storm of 76 goals has become a storyteller. The announcer's voice rang out. No more cheers, just a heartbeat. He walked to center ice, light reflecting off the rink like 1,000 mirrors, each holding a fragment of his life, Bobby Orr soaring, the roars of 1,970, his father's voice in his head, Carrie's smile behind a frame. He stopped where the Bruins logo lay beneath his feet, then bent down. From trembling hands, he placed a single white flower. No one spoke. In the arena's hush, he whispered, voice hoarse and quivering like a breeze, "For Tony, for Carrie, for the game." 3 names, 3 worlds, his entire life in one prayer. As he stood, the lights caught his wrinkled face, but his eyes shone brighter than ever, the light of a man who'd learned glory's full cost and still smiled at it. Leaving the ice, he glanced back at the empty rink, whispering to himself, "Fame melts, records fade, but love, and the courage to keep skating through pain that's forever, Outside, early snow began to fall, soft as time's final applause. He walked slowly through fans, hands reaching out, thanks ringing in the cold air. A boy held out an old number 7 jersey. Phil stopped, signed it, and smiled. "Keep it, that's a whole life." The Boston night closed, but his story didn't. In the silence of empty stands, you could still hear memory's breath, the breath of a soul that never gave up. If Phil Esposito made you believe in the power of will, leave a tribute for #7, the man who scored not just on ice, but in America's heart. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. See you in the next journey where legends never melt. Perhaps what makes Phil Esposito's story pierce our hearts isn't just the dazzling heights, the 1968-69 season breaking 100 points, the 76 goals divided by 152 points record in 1970-71, the 2 Stanley Cups in 1970 and 1972, but the enduring cold of a lifetime, the too fat to play boy growing up amid so sweet Marie's steel clamor, the Boston hero traded in 1975 becoming a stranger in New York, the GM called a lost legend. More painful than any fall on ice was the 1992 birth of the Tampa Bay Lightning, stands packed but the seat beside him empty. The confession, "It cost me everything, a marriage, money, but not my soul." The loss of daughter Carrie to an abdominal aneurysm, 2012, and opening his door to Dylan, 19, the kid smiles just like his mom. The farewell to Tony, 2021, with the whisper, "For the first time, I had no one to call after a game." Yet, from those cracks, he sowed a legacy. Silent tears in the broadcast booth as the Lightning won in 2004, 2020, 2021, knowing his sacrifices weren't in vain, touching the bronze statue outside Amalie Arena, whispering, "Tony, Carrie, we did it." At 83, enduring physical therapy, signing every poster, founding funds for kids, writing a will leaving assets to the community and noting, "Dylan needs grit, not inheritance." The final moment at Boston Garden, the white flower on the logo and the prayer, "For Tony, for Carrie, for the game," crystallizes a simple truth for America today. Glory melts, records fade, but love, community responsibility, and the courage to keep skating through pain are eternal. Practical lessons. Keep promises to your hometown. Choose opportunity for the next generation over monetary legacy. Dare to start anew where no one believes, like bringing hockey to Florida, and know when to stop fighting to forgive yourself, because that's how you win at life. If Phil Esposito's story of turning pain into legacy and leaving light for the next generation touches your heart, hit subscribe to join us in celebrating legends who live on with time. Thank you for staying until the end. See you in the next video where we share stories of faith, love, and courage that never melt.